On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse, we talk with an abuse survivor named Lita, and Lita was in an abusive relationship with a terrorizing military veteran. It's a story of being seen, threats, weaponized trauma, isolation, gaslighting, physical violence, kernels of truth, and shame. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and with me today we have Lita. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you for asking. And if you want to be a guest like Lita is today, go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, click on the guest form button at the top of the page, and we will go from there. Also, join our newsletter and receive a free workbook from this episode and all future episodes. And you can find that as well at narcissistapocalypse.com. And people are really finding our workbooks very helpful, our newsletter as well, very informative and helpful as well. And we do have a content warning for today's episode as we do discuss sexual assault, suicidal ideation, and threats in multiple, and I mean multiple situations of physical violence. And some of these can become very graphic, and it is throughout, and it is not easy to hear. And we also have a very big warning here. There is animal abuse discussed in this episode. It is graphic. So when you hear about ducks, I repeat, when you hear about ducks, turn it off for about 5 minutes just to be safe. So that is your content warning for today. And today you're going to hear Lita's story. And Lita grew up neglected, parentified, constantly moving, and never really was truly seen by anyone. So when her abuser acknowledges her strength, they bond over similar trauma. The trauma bond really takes hold. And as this relationship progressed, things escalated and it didn't stop. And the weaponization of the abuser's trauma and mental health was key in Lita's story. The kernels of truth provided excuses to evade responsibility, to evade accountability. And Lita is truly lucky to be here today, to be alive. And I know she's going to validate a lot of you out there as well today. And I really can't thank her enough for being here and doing so. And now I'm going to get out of my way and your way. Lita, the floor is now yours.
So, I'm going to be telling my story about very difficult lessons, and I guess my stubbornness and how it's led me to figure out how to let go of things that don't matter, advocate for myself, and really hang on to the important stuff. So, I grew up in a pretty remote community in Northern Ontario. My parents divorced when I was a toddler. I don't have any memories of them being together, and I don't have any specific thoughts or feelings about them being divorced. It was kind of all that I knew. My needs with regards to my identity were very much ignored. My mother was kind of trying to make a clone of herself. So she used to buy us matching clothes, and then she would take it personally if I didn't want to wear them. And if I wanted to pick my own clothes, called entitled and spoiled, for whatever reason, my brother was allowed to have the things that he wanted. My mother had a long term boyfriend when I was a kid. He was my main father figure when I was a child, and he was great. And then at about 10 years old, my mom moved down south, and I remember being really rocked by that. Like, my whole life was just sort of picked up and moved I didn't have a good relationship with my father. I'm sure a lot of that had to do with the fact that my mom sort of pitted my brother and I against him, reminded us that he didn't fight for custody, things like that. So my father and I were never close. And when we moved down south with her, I was leaving all of my friends. I was like 12 hours away. My main father figure was no longer in my life. My mom didn't want us talking about him. And, you know, I didn't really know what had happened. I know that they had a rocky relationship and she was constantly confiding in me and telling me things at a young age that I shouldn't have been told. And she would sort of curl up and lay her head on my lap and call me mommy and things like that. And I didn't realize that that wasn't normal, but definitely I was parentified in that environment. And then when we went down south, she had a really crappy relationship with a dude who was an alcoholic. And so we sort of blew our life up to go down south with this guy, and it was really bad. Um, I know that I felt very alone. I felt like she was never there. I don't really have any memories of her being there. She's recently told me that she was there all the time. And so whether she was just emotionally disconnected and sort of hiding in her room, or if, she actually wasn't there, I have no idea. I just remember feeling like it was my brother and I on our own. And then because that relationship wasn't good, we moved around quite a bit. We moved during like in the middle of school years, which was difficult. Like going to a new school is hard enough, especially in a new area. But in the middle of a school year, you really stand out like a sore thumb. And you basically get announced by the teacher too. Like, hey, we have a new student in. This is so and so. So what I found was I'd go to a new school and how I was perceived by the other students really seemed to depend on like the day of the week for that particular school. So sometimes like everybody wanted to be my friend, and then sometimes I was immediately the outcast. And I think in that moment I realized that it was nothing to do with me, and it was just luck of the draw for that day, like how somebody was feeling for that day. So I also realized that it was unwise to trust people very soon, because in the couple of times that I did, it blew up in my face. So I spent the majority of my teen years with one foot out the door with my relationships. Like I had a group of friends, but I was never comfortable being vulnerable with them. I would never share secrets or anything because I had seen how that had gone and it wasn't good. There were a few times in school where I was being picked on or bullied or something like that. And somebody would call the house and leave a message. And it happened, I recall, on two occasions, and my mom got the message. And she was very upset that my school drama was impacting her. So I was sort of shamed for it. Like, how could you let this happen? That was like the classic phrase from her was, how could you let this happen? And so I learned that when something bad happens to me, I can't talk to her about it, that it's my fault. And it was a feeling of being very alone, and whatever happens, I've got to deal with it myself. Like nobody's going to come and save you. So my last year of high school, I met a guy. He was my first boyfriend. I think he was like 3 years older than me or something. I met him a couple weeks before my 18th birthday, and it was a problematic relationship. He struggled with depression, and he was also an addict. And I'd say that he wasn't addicted to any particular drug. He was addicted to feeling good. So whatever that might be, it could be drinking, it could be cheating on me, it could be his drug of choice was cocaine. And because I was very naive, I had no idea that's what was going on. And it was like years into the relationship, and he stole money from me. At the time when we started dating, I was still living at home, and he would call me on a Friday night and say, "I'm on my way to pick you up." And I would get ready and I would wait for him, and he would never show up. And it was sort of like in my mom's face that I was sitting there waiting for him to come, and he just didn't come. And I would wait hours and hours and hours, and I would be devastated, and I would get shamed for allowing this to happen. Not And it wasn't a conversation like, "You deserve better than this. You shouldn't let somebody treat you this way." It was, again, "Why are you letting this happen?" So I I learned then that I can't share struggles within a relationship. I learned not to advocate for myself. I wasn't told to advocate for myself. I knew that it sucked, but I wasn't really given any advice. I wasn't pointed in any particular direction until I found out he was cheating on me. Things had gotten quite bad by that point. We were together for like 3.5 years. And finally, I broke up with him, and I was like, "That all sucked." I didn't know what I liked, but I had a pretty good idea of what I didn't like. So, for the majority of my 20s and 30s, because I didn't know what I liked, and I was never told to advocate for yourself and never told to, pay attention to the things that you actually like, I was just looking for somebody who was not those things. Somebody who was responsible because he was irresponsible. Somebody who didn't do drugs because he did a lot of drugs, things like that. And for the most part, my relationships were okay. There was a guy I had met before going tree planting. And if you know anything about tree planting, you live in a bush camp with a bunch of other dirty planters, and there's no cell service or anything like that. And, I had just met this guy. It was a guy that I worked with. It was like, maybe there's something there, maybe there's not. We were just sort of talking. And he remembered where my mom worked and that she had a different last name from mine, tracked her down at her work, begged her to know the company that I was working for so that he could call the company and then find out what hotel we stayed at on our days off so that he could call the hotel. And, like, according to my mom, this was all okay. So I have no idea this is going on because I'm living in a bush camp. And I show up at the hotel, and the hotel staff are pissed off because this guy's been calling nonstop. Like, "Are they there? How about today? Do you know when they're coming?" And, so I get there, and they're like, "There's messages for you." Like, "Okay." Like, "Is somebody sick?" And they're like, "They said it was an emergency." And so I get this sheet of paper with this dude's name, and I call him back, and I'm like, "How did you what? Like, how did you find out where I was?" And he told me that he remembered where my mom worked, and he tracked her down, and that he talked to her, and she somehow thought it was a good idea. She thought it was super sweet that he stalked me. This was my ex of several years ago, but it's sort of like an example of, like, how crappy relationships go and how, like, my support system or lack thereof has been involved in some of these relationships. He asked me to quit my job. I said no. And then I came back, and he was sort of, begging me, and I saved up all this money, and I know you like to cook, and I've stocked the fridge. I figured you can do some cooking and all this sort of stuff. And coming back from tree planting, I was looking for a place to stay. I was getting a lot of push from my mom, like, "You should give it a shot." And I was like, "Ugh, I mean, okay, like, everything is telling me this is what I should do." So I start dating this guy, and we move in together, and it was horrible. He was super, super controlling. And it got to the point where, he was calling me nonstop, when I was at work. And one day, by the time I left work and I looked at my phone, I had missed so many calls from him and I was terrified. I was too scared to go home. So I didn't. And I realized, like, this is going to be the end of the relationship. Like, I can't continue. And I called my mom. I needed somewhere to stay for that night. I had somewhere to go after that. And I said, look, I just left this guy and I need somewhere to stay tonight until I can go to my friend's place. And her response was, how could you let this happen? And no, she wouldn't let me stay there. So that, like, again, I needed to figure things out on my own. I couldn't rely on my mother. I didn't have a relationship with my father. If I ended a relationship, regardless of how bad it was my fault. How could I let it happen? What was I doing wrong and why was I not fixing it? So this is kind of the state of mind that I was in. And then I had a relationship with a guy. It lasted about 7 years. Him and I built a business together, and we were really successful. We were making well into the six figures. We bought a house, and we were doing really well. I was not in a really good place at the time that him and I met. I was starting treatment for the effects of a sexual assault that occurred when I was in my early 20s. The treatment was medication, take more medication kind of thing. And I came to the conclusion that treating the side effects of a medication with more medication is not the answer. So I decided to stop the medication and figure out how to manage my own emotions. It was a rough go, but I learned that when I felt like I was losing control, when I felt overly emotional, that I did have the ability to manage my own emotions. And in the process of recovering and healing, I outgrew that guy. I tried to help him and sort of push him to see that the stuff that we were fighting about, that the issues that he was frustrated with were things that we could work on. And he was unwilling to change. He was kind of a man child. And he used weaponized incompetence. Like, he learned throughout his life that behaving as though he was too incompetent to go grocery shopping, do laundry, um, use a power tool, it was like comical. It became part of his identity. And I was already sort of forced to be hyper independent and capable. And it was a role that I easily took on, but it became really exhausting because I didn't want to be his mother. So I left him, and we owned a house together. So when I left, I decided to step away from the business. I was the one that sort of started it and got it going. So I knew I could do it again. And he had a son, and I wasn't going to take the house. It was too much for me physically to upkeep. So we were going to settle, like, financially. Essentially, he was going to buy me out of the business and the house. So that was a thing in negotiations.
So before we get to the meeting of this person, I just want to point out that you've done work on yourself. You've been doing work and working on being a better person and dealing a little bit with the past. But along the way, you obviously have your mom's influence here of how you feel about yourself in one way. There's a lot of isolation in the sense of you don't have a support system. You've now been on the earth here for a while, but your support system isn't the best. And the way you've been treated your whole life, you've come across in some cases in the way that you're choosing men, choosing the opposite of what was there, a strategy we've heard many times on this show, and many people that have gone through abuse, a lot of the times they're looking for the opposite of what their partner was before, and then they fall in the hands of someone that they think is different, but they're just disguised a little bit better. So you've had some relationships that there's abuse going on. So when coming into the relationship we're about to talk about, those issues that are already there can be amplified and taken advantage of in ways and can cause a big slew of problems, and abuse can really take hold. And when you don't have that support system still, and you have the mom that you have, it's hard to kind of maneuver in a lot of ways. And you're coming out of a long relationship here. You've been in long relationships, but at the same time, it seems like you're always starting brand new, you know? So here you are, and you're starting brand new again, and you meet this person. Your life is, we move, start brand new, move, start brand new. And as you said before, I don't know what I'm gonna get. Sometimes, on one day those kids are gonna be nice. Some days, no. So here again is you, in a way, it's this repeating pattern of your life of starting new, and now we don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah. Yep, very much so. And the other thing is, like, I was obviously very aware of the work that I did because it was a conscious thing. I didn't realize how much work I had to do. So I had that awareness that, yes, I have been working really hard on myself. I've been working on emotional regulation. I've been working on perspective. I used to remind myself, you can't control what happens to you. You can control how you respond to it. And I was very open to looking at my own flaws and what is it about me that's put me in this position? Am I protecting my ego? Do I have a sense of entitlement? Do I feel like I deserve more than I actually do? There was all kinds of things where I was stripping myself down, and no matter how uncomfortable the thought was, those little insecurities that kind of tickle you in the back of your mind and you push them out of the way, I was embracing those. But it also meant that if somebody was like, "Hey, you're entitled," I would think about it instead of immediately denying that accusation. And so when I met him, I was so receptive to criticism and taking it as if it were truth, and then trying to fix that about myself. And that was like the perfect recipe for, like, hey, abuse me. But in my experience, I'd never experienced anybody like him. So, like, the idea that somebody like him was even out there and capable of doing the things that he did never crossed my mind. The way I saw it was his awareness of these ideas of stripping away your ego and looking at yourself and then working on those things. How could you be aware of that and claim to be doing those things if you weren't actually doing those things as well? So when him and I met, he sort of, I guess, mirrored me and said that he was doing these things as well. So he was somebody that I knew through the community that I work in. And I had never spoken to him. I didn't know him, but I knew of him. We were Facebook friends, but, had thousands of Facebook friends just because networking within my community or within that industry. It's really common on social media. So, you know, when him and I had our first conversation, we had been bantering in comments, I think, on a post, and we ended up having a conversation in Messenger, and we joked around a little bit. And I remember him saying, "So, what's your story? Because somebody doesn't become like you by growing up with a white picket fence." And I've always been an open book. So I didn't understand why you would protect certain vulnerabilities. And I gave him like the Coles Notes version of my life, the good and the bad. And I think he responded with, "Wow, you've been through a war," or something, and praised me for my strength and all that stuff. And I think that was probably the first time in my life where anybody had ever made comments about my strengths or the things that I'd overcome with what I thought was no agenda. I don't actually recall ever being told those things. And I felt like, I've been through a lot and I've worked really hard, but being accused of being entitled or lazy or whatever, I always had those doubts that this is my entitlement and my ego telling me that I'm strong when I'm really just a normal person. But when he told me, what did he have to gain from that? And he seemed genuine because he was also showing me what I thought was like his raw, true self. I believed him. And that was incredibly validating and addictive because it's like the first time that I'm hearing these things, probably in my life. And so here's this person. I feel like we're on the same journey. That's validating that I'm on like a logical journey because, hey, somebody else is doing the same thing. He's telling me that I'm strong, and I've kind of had like those suspicions that maybe I am, but also a lot of doubt that, oh, maybe I'm not. And I felt seen in a way that I never had before. Like I in a way I couldn't describe. And the beginning of that relationship was basically like, we're going to improve ourselves to the best of our abilities. And we're just going to become great, better people and the best versions of ourselves that we can be. And a little about him. He is a military veteran. He told me that he grew up and experienced some abuse and some neglect. I know based on a lot of other lies that he's told me where he poses himself to be the victim in situations. That's very common for him. And looking back now, I have no idea how much of what he told me is true about his childhood, if he was sharing some of those stories because they were similar to mine, if he was sharing those things because they were, totally true. I have no idea. But he wanted to sort of get away. He went into the military. He spent, I think, at the time of his retirement, it was just under 18 years. And he spent about half of his military career in a special operations unit. And because I'm Canadian and he's American, the Canadian military is not very big. And the culture around Canadian military is nothing like it is in the US. So lots of Canadians don't know anybody who's in the military. I don't know a single American who doesn't know somebody who's in the military. So I knew nothing about it, which was a great opportunity for him to brag about himself. So he tells me he's in special operations. I was like, that's cool. I don't know what that is. And so it gave him the opportunity to tell me how elite he was, the, particular branch that he was in and the group that he was in and all that sort of stuff, and how his deployments went and what his role was within the military. And there was, a lot of covert stuff and intel gathering and disguises and working with sources to get information for missions and all this sort of stuff, right? So he gets to paint this picture however he wants it of like how elite he was. And peppered in there are the ways that he talked about how he gathered intel and the ways that you can manipulate people. There's religion, there's family, there's financial, there's all of these different ways where you can appeal to somebody to have them on your side and working for you. And I'm thinking, wow, that's super cool that you know these things. Cause like that sounds super cool. I don't realize that he's also saying this to plant the seed that he can find things out, that he can manipulate his environment.
I was going to say that in some ways, it is super cool that he knows how to do these things. However, if the person is not a good person, then it's not great that this person knows these things. And the person you're dealing with legitimately is involved with these things within the military. And I think he does these things mostly overseas, from what I understand, with people in different countries who are themselves putting themselves out there in situations that are risky. And his job is to take advantage of that risk. And those people are putting themselves in dangerous positions. And he's in a position where in his job, there's nothing risky that well there's risk, but like not like the person coming to him and giving him information type risk. So he's been used to a culture for a very long time where deception is part of it, but also he's in this culture of the military where he's rewarded for doing some not great things and being rewarded for those things for a very long time in a specific culture for not being great. And not to say that all of the people in the military are not great. I'm not saying that, but this person specifically within his job, he gets rewarded for some pretty terrible things. So now you're dealing with someone who is used to being rewarded for doing these things. And that's how he's lived his life. This is what is internally in him, like breathing. He's been in it for so long. It's hard to rewire that if you even want to change.
Yeah, exactly. It's getting what you want by any means necessary is essentially like the rules that he had to abide by were there, and there was definitely some like never do that. But, you know, there was turning a blind eye from some superiors in circumstances, and even in a role like that where he had a lot of freedom, where he was given an objective and they needed to figure out how to complete the objective within the confines of certain rules, knowing that some rules are a little bit flexible. Even in that, um, he was still he still got in some hot water a couple of times. And the catalyst to him medically retiring was I would call it a rage outburst on a superior. And rather than write him up for this assault, essentially, is what it was, they decided to push him through a medical evaluation because it could be chalked up as symptoms of a traumatic brain injury or PTSD. So even the way that he left the military, he did something and did not experience the consequences. In fact, he was rewarded for it because he was given a medical retirement when he should have been given dishonorable discharge.
So far, everything that you've been discussing when talking about him has been online, and eventually you do meet him in person. So take us from here.
Yeah, so we'd been talking for maybe a month and a half, 2 months or something like that, and, at that point, I didn't want to commit to, like, we're in a relationship, even though we had exchanged I love yous by that point. I did wanna meet in person. And so I went there. It was 4th of July weekend, and I was only staying there for a few days. He picked me up from the airport. The next day, his boss was having a 4th of July party. And when I got there and he introduced me, I remember shaking the hand of one of his colleagues, and the colleague sort of looking shocked, like, "Oh, you have a girlfriend." And I remember making a note of it, but sort of dismissing it like I had no idea. Turns out it's because his ex-girlfriend before me used to work with him, and they had only broken up days before him and I started talking. So by this point, it was like 2 months since they had broken up, and he was already bringing this girl from Canada. So he was working for a defense contracting company, and there was a lot more on, I'm just gonna call it spy shit, for lack of a better term. At this point, I will call those things warnings from him, like him warning me of what he was capable of. So in talking about the new job that he was in, talking about hidden cameras and showing me different tradecraft things that they were making. And it made me, I would say, not cautious, but sort of aware of every move that I made when I was with him and when I was not with him. It was like the Truman Show, where only I felt as though I was being recorded all the time, or I behaved as though I was being recorded all the time based on how much surveillance he claimed to do. The visit went fine, and then I returned home. And it was while I was driving home from the airport, I hadn't heard from him. Like I told him I landed, I was halfway home. It was a couple hours from the airport. I hadn't heard from him. I finally got home, and several hours after I had landed, he got back to me and I asked him if everything was okay because he was quiet. And he flipped that around and he accused me of being selfish and punishing him for my own insecurities, and that I just jumped to things not being okay instead of even considering the fact that maybe he's not doing well. And, he's not wrong. I didn't consider that maybe that he was unwell. And he had told me about some of the struggles that he has with PTSD and his TBI. And so, again, I'm not wanting to protect my ego here. If disarming myself allows me to grow. So I took that and I believed him. I thought, okay, yeah, he's struggling with his mental health. And it was selfish of me to ask if I did something wrong and just completely not even consider that he was struggling himself. And then that was it, followed by silent treatment for weeks. He would go days without texting me, without responding. Prior to me going there, he would initiate intimate conversations. And after I came back, there were none. And if I made any effort, he would change the subject or he would shame me for requiring intimacy to make myself feel better. Like I was using him like a drug to make myself feel better. And, he reminded me while I was on deployment, I was gone for this many months and I managed. He said that it had been a problem with his previous exes, his failure to engage in any intimacy, and that it made them really insecure. He mentioned that he had tried medication at one point for his TBI, and that had some physical effects on his ability to become aroused. And by the time he stopped that medication, his girlfriend was so insecure that they were never intimate. But he had told me that it had been a problem with his previous relationships and resulted in a rift with previous partners because they become insecure, make accusations, or they were unfaithful. And at one point, he said, "You will cheat on me in ways that I consider cheating." I will never forget those words. And I'm like, well, you could make that anything. Like, okay. And then I was planning another visit to see him. And the day that I was booking my flight, he called me and he broke up with me. And what he said was that this company that he's working for is prepping for sale, that this is a really difficult process. It is stressful for him. And he is concerned that the additional stress is going to affect him mentally so badly that it will ruin any potential for a relationship that we could have. So he doesn't want to continue with me. And, maybe later, but not right now because he has too much going on. And I was absolutely devastated. He didn't respond to me after that. After we had that conversation, I realized at that point how much I had relied on the things that he was saying to me, the kind things and telling me that I was strong, but also that he had brought me so high. And then after the visit, he just dragged me down with all this silent treatment and, blaming me for being so inconsiderate that I wasn't thinking about his mental health, and then things just end. And it was like such a painful end. And I had never felt the way that I felt when I met him. And I couldn't conceive of how I would ever feel like that again. As low as I was in the moment, I couldn't even I had no idea how I was gonna get back up. It just felt very incomplete, unresolved. And it sucked really, really, really bad.
So, with how the relationship began, in the way he saw you, in the way you felt seen, a good amount of work was really done right there. He took your whole entire life and essentially saw the core of who you were and what your wound was, and he filled it. And when he filled it, what he did was he was able to manipulate you to put your self-worth into his hands. And once someone's self-worth is in someone else's hands, they can do a lot with it. They can become the puppet master. But also during this time, you're getting to hear certain things, what he does for a living. They're kind of like hints in a way at things he can do to you. So now you're, in a way, have these threats. There's a control going on. It's not explicitly said, but it's pointed out. It's there, and it's scary stuff and stalking stuff, autonomy-based stuff. He's already used the silent treatment. He's already weaponized PTSD and brain injury. And you've only met in person once so far. A lot of seeds have been planted and foundations have been laid by him. A trauma bond or addiction of sorts has been created already. So with that being said, what happens from here?
I think it was a couple of months, and because he was breaking up with me under the pretense that it was for his mental health, I asked if I could still check on him, and he said, of course. I would occasionally check on him. I didn't want to, harass him. And, but I would, send him messages and ask him how he was doing from time to time, maybe like once a month or so. And then a few months go by, and one of those times he responds. And he tells me that he's doing good, that the company has a buyer, that he is going to get a settlement from the sale, and he's going to get out of defense contracting. He told me that he was going to work with one of his bosses who also has a private investigation company. And, earlier he had told me that he did work on the side with that boss, surveillance, putting recording devices in vehicles and things like that. And so he said that he was going to go and work with that guy, but he was happy to be finished with this company because it was really stressful and they worked him too hard. And then things just kind of picked up where they left off before the first visit. So I guess it would be the love bombing, but I would say it was more consistent when I reconnected with him. It seemed a lot more stable. He seemed more stable. He seemed happier. Things looked like they were running smoothly. And then after several months, he proposed to me. And it was on the phone because we're in two different countries. And I said yes. And I said, I would like to ask one thing if you could ask me in person. And he said, of course, that he would. And I was planning another visit. And with my work, I do seminars with people. And it takes me a few hours. I put my phone on silent. That was something that he knew. I used to share my maps with him because I traveled up to 4 hours for seminars, and he would be worried about the long drives, especially in Canadian winters. And so there was this evening where I had a seminars, and it was nothing new. I drove there, I shared my maps, I got there, and when I got there, I said, I'm here, I'm going inside, my phone will be on silent, I'll probably be 3 hours or so. Put my phone in my purse. As I'm leaving, grab my purse and grab my phone, and I look at it, and I've got a bunch of missed calls and a bunch of text messages. And, they start the notifications like overlap, and all I can see is like question marks. I'm like, what is going on? I get out to the car and I look and I see he's like, I'm worried about you. Is everything okay? Where are you? You're not answering. And I call him back and he doesn't answer. And I share my maps. I drive home And then by the time I get home, it's maybe like 3 hours later, and he tells me that he is in North Carolina doing some courses. He is at a bar, and he is just killing time because he's staying at a hotel, that sort of stuff. I say, okay, have your fun evening, and I don't want you sitting there texting your girlfriend while you're at a bar, enjoy yourself. He tells me when he's leaving. And then there's some time discrepancies, I will say, between him saying, I'm leaving the bar and getting an Uber, and him taking a picture of himself in Uber, and then him getting home and a post on social media that he made. And this Uber ride took like over an hour. And I'm like, like, what took you so long? He sends me this weird video of him getting to the hotel where it's like he's recording himself in the elevator, walking down the hall, opening his hotel room, and then panning through the hotel before I've asked any questions. This is what I get. This is him like telling me that he's back at the hotel. And so he was obviously intoxicated. And in his mind, he thought that proving to me that like that this video was going to be cute or something. Like, hey, I'm home, you're coming, or I'm at the hotel and you're coming with me, kind of thing, while also proving that he was not there with somebody else. And so I questioned him, like, what was the deal with that video? Why was it like over an hour for you to go 15 minutes? And he sends me a message and then doesn't continue the conversation until the next day when he's sober. And at that time, when he's sober, he gets up in the morning and he just berates me for how dare I accuse him of being unfaithful. Again, that's my insecurities to even consider that he would do something like that. And he sent me his Uber receipt or the ride receipt or something like that to show proof. But I remember looking at where he was, the Uber ride, and essentially figured out that there was no way that things went the way that he claimed they did. And I was fairly certain at that time that he was cheating on me while he was out of town. But I sort of pushed that down. I didn't want to believe it. It sort of always nagged at me. And I remember I kept the screenshots that he sent me, and I kept the times and like the locations where he was, because I thought if I just looked at this in the right way, I'd be able to show him that I have proof. But I let him convince me that he didn't, and that it was my insecurity. It was all in my head, and that he was offended by my accusation. And I just remember by the end of this conversation asking him if he would forgive me for accusing him of that. And that was such a painful thing to do. Like, I felt so dirty and low for asking this guy to forgive me when I'm 99% sure that he's lied to me and he cheated on me, but I can't prove it. And he's talked in circles in a way that he's almost convinced me that I'm crazy. Not that he's right and I'm wrong, but I'm crazy because I can't reconcile the story he's telling me, the blame he's putting on me, and what I know to be true. It just doesn't line up. It's incompatible. And it was beyond me being wrong or right, or him being wrong or right. It was that incompatibility of reality. And I'm crazy for thinking this. I'm crazy for not being able to emotionally let this go. And so something changed in that moment where again, I stopped trusting myself, and I start trusting his reality more. So I go to visit. By this point, the company that he was working for has sold. He's no longer living in the city that he was living in before. Now he's got a property outside of, this tiny little town, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And it's a beautiful place, beautiful property. I stay there for a few weeks. Again, when he had asked me to marry him on the phone, I asked him if he would also propose in person because I wanted the experience. And so day one, I thought, maybe today's the day. Nope, it wasn't. I was like, okay, well, maybe he's going to do something nice for us and ask. No, it never came. So I was there for, I think, about 3 weeks and came back to Canada. He never asked me in person. And upon returning to Canada, I had started to make preparations for eventually immigrating.
So you're going to get married and move to the United States, and you do end up going to visit another time, and things happen at a barbecue. So what happens from here?
So we're going to have this barbecue for his family and friends to meet me. And so we had this smoker going, and I've been cooking my whole life. I'm sort of obsessed with food. He was a foodie as well. And he was asking me what the temperature of the grill should be and how long the salmon should smoke. And I told him, and he disagreed with me. And I said, it's a slow smoked salmon. So it's on there for a long time. And he exploded. He grabbed some of the dishes and slammed them down. Food was sort of flying everywhere. And I was really shocked. I was like, I mean, like, I'm not engaging in this conversation. And I go inside and I sort of sat on the couch and I was like, I'm just going to sit here and let things settle. And he follows me inside and he's screaming at me. He's throwing stuff. He's clearing tables. He's throwing chairs. And he picks up the couch that I'm sitting on and flips it. And so I go flying. The couch goes flying. And I get to my feet. He pushes the couch into me and pins me up against the wall and then cocks his fist back like he's going to punch me in the face. And to me, this is out of nowhere. I've never seen anything like this from anyone, let alone from him. There was no gradual escalation to this. It was just, he snapped. And it was so incompatible with who I believed he was that when he cocked his fist back, I actually laughed. And I said, what are you going to punch me? Like, this is absurd. And he spit in my face. He threw me to the ground, put his hand around my throat, and he slapped me. And I remember just being completely stunned. And then he tells me that I was the one that pressured him to let me stay and I shouldn't have done that. He starts grabbing my stuff and throwing it out on the front lawn. And I'm mortified and I am shocked and dumbfounded. Like I can't even reconcile what is happening right now. And then it's kind of quiet for a little bit. And I keep my distance from him because I'm terrified. He sleeps on the couch. I sleep in the bed. In the morning, I was sort of cleaning up and I noticed that his pistol is sitting underneath one of the couch pillows. Like not the couch cushions that you sit on, but just like one of the little corner pillows. So I sort of, as I'm putting them where they go and folding the blankets, I feel the pistol, and I'm not unfamiliar with guns or necessarily uncomfortable with them, but I was very surprised. And I didn't want to leave it there. So I sort of just set it down on the coffee table. I didn't say anything. And then, this argument proceeds into the next day of him telling me that this has occurred because I argued, because I set him off, that I always have to be right. And I act like I'm a subject matter expert and that I'm full of myself. And because of his TBI and his PTSD, he is unable to manage his emotions. Once he snaps, he can't de-escalate and he's unable to control it. That the military has extinguished flight, so he'll never leave an argument. And he only has fight. So it's like the introduction of justifying his behavior from a medical condition that I'm already aware of, and me being responsible for his behavior. So he's not accountable and I'm responsible. I hear about these gradual, slow increases in abuse and violence, the frog in the boiling pot. And it wasn't like that. For whatever reason, he used psychological manipulation and emotional abuse leading up to this point. And I had no idea that he'd already done so much damage that he could do that and I still wouldn't leave. So it doesn't even require an escalation in violence to get to a point like that, or, shoving, pushing, and an escalation. Just having the emotional escalation, like the emotional abuse, is enough. So I don't want to be reliant on him financially. I've always been pretty self-sufficient. I've worked from a young age. So it was really important to me that the moment I agreed to stay down there, that I figured out what to do for work. Prior to me visiting, he had made a connection with a kennel, a dog training kennel down there, and I was so grateful for it. So I go and I have this meeting and I made a really good impression, and he sent me back home with a dog and payment. He paid me right then and there for this dog that I hadn't even, worked with yet. So I was so happy and so excited. And I'm thinking that he's going to be excited when I get home. And I pull in the driveway and he's just standing there with the door open, like waiting for me. And I was like, oh, this does not seem good. I get out and I tell him excitedly everything went really good at the kennel and that he offered me the job and he sent me home with my first payment and a dog to train. And he exploded. He was punching walls. He accused me of making decisions without him, that I just came home with this dog and I didn't tell him. And again, I'm dumbfounded. But he's not wrong. Yes, it was safe to assume that I was going to be training these dogs and that I was going to be taking dogs home. But this meeting was a meeting, and there was no discussion prior to this meeting about me coming home that day with a dog. We didn't have a specific conversation about it. So I'm thinking he's right to be upset. He breaks a bunch of stuff. He makes it very clear that this is not okay. He's starting to express how much he dislikes dogs, and it's very clear that I'm not going to be able to train dogs. Now, I've already taken money for the dog that I have, so I'm obligated to finish this, but I'm not going to be training any other dogs. And because he has expressed so much disgust for the fact that this dog is even here, every time I have to take the dog out to work with her or to let her go to the bathroom, I'm getting dirty looks. There's comments, there's all kinds of tension from him, and it's very, very uncomfortable. And I can't not do it. Like, the faster I train this dog, the faster she goes home and the faster this is over with. But that involves working with her more frequently, which means more exposure to him being a dick. So I end up telling the owner of the kennels that I can't keep training dogs. I'm really sorry, that I would finish that dog and return it when she's done. And then I wasn't going to be able to take any more dogs at this time. So now I have no job, and I have decided to move down to North Carolina. I have no source of income beyond what I had for savings. And because I was selling some of my belongings back in Canada, I had a little bit from that. I was getting the settlement from my ex. We had finally agreed on a number. So I was getting about 100,000 for, my equity in the house and the business. And I knew that I could rely on that a little bit. It wasn't going to last forever, but I was hoping that I could make that last to at least have some kind of contribution to the household. He decided to start an LLC, a business for me to sell things. He left it ambiguous so that I could sell whatever he was telling me to, essentially. And, that was, again, his way of controlling the finances. I get the settlement, and immediately after, his truck breaks down and he needs his truck for work. So I take some of that money that I got and I pay for the truck to be towed, pay for some repairs. It ends up being a catastrophic issue, and he has decided that he needs a new truck and he also needs a dump truck. So I'm thinking, okay, I can do this. Like, financially, it makes sense to ensure that he has a stable income, because really he's the only one of the two of us that can legally work right now. So I considered it an investment in his business to make sure that we could be financially successful, to get us to the point where I could pay an immigration lawyer so that I could legally work in the States. When he got mad after the settlement, it turned into this explosive argument. He pulled out his pistol again, but this time, instead of just hiding it under his pillow like he had the first time, he pinned me up against the door to the house and punched the door beside my head with the barrel of the pistol. And obviously, that's terrifying to have a gun held to your head. I leave. I stay at an Airbnb. Um, he's calling, he's texting, and again, it's all my fault. He can't control himself. I am verbally attacking him, so he decided to attack me back, according to him. And that's his justification that, I just need to do better, that I'm not nearly as empathetic or considerate as I think that I am. And that's a thing that I have to work on. So I come back after that because I believe him. I believe that he can't control himself. This behavior seems so explosive and unlike anything I've ever seen. It makes sense to me that he's losing control and can't control himself. So I invest in a dump truck for him while he was gone picking it up. I got some ducks because I love ducks. We had some fowl. We had guineas and chickens and stuff like that. And I had gotten some ducks. And he came home and we got into another argument. And I think it was within 10 days of me getting the ducks. In that argument, he killed them all because he knew that I loved them. So now he is escalated from having a pistol out to, you know, pointing it at me, threatening me with it. Now he's actually killing things with it. And he didn't kill the chickens or the guineas. He killed the ducks because that was what I was most excited about. And during this argument, like, these events last hours, 6, 8 hours, sometimes days, where it just never ends. And I can't get away from him. And I thought when he started killing the ducks that he was gonna kill me. So I decided to record on my phone. I recorded a video, but I put my phone in my purse so that it picked up the audio. He had told me repeatedly how to get away with self-defense killing legally, what the legal requirements are for a shooting to be considered self-defense. And I was worried that if he killed me, that that would be his excuse, that he was defending himself. And I thought, well, the least that I can do is report it so that somebody knows what really happened. Hopefully somebody finds my phone and they hear this recording and they hear what really happened, and he doesn't get away with it. Now, leading up to that particular argument, we had watched a movie and bad guy was held at gunpoint and acting all tough. And he responded, he made a comment that, when somebody's in that position, they always beg for their life. And the way that he said it, it was like I gathered that he enjoyed when somebody begs for their life. I don't remember exactly what he said. It was just, I made a note that he gets off on somebody begging for their life. So when we had this argument and I thought he was going to kill me, I refused to beg for my life because the only thing that I could think of is, like, I can't stop him from killing me, but I can at least make sure that he doesn't enjoy it. So I decided I wasn't going to beg. And I don't know if I would call it gray rocking or disassociating. I was, like, telling myself, if you survive this, you're going to be so much stronger. Like, this is making you a stronger person. So I was disconnecting from the moment that I was in, but making a really conscious effort to not show him that I was scared and to not beg for my life. And, he took my keys away from me. He threw them on the roof of the house. And thankfully, we didn't have a gutter, so they slid off because it wasn't my vehicle. So they weren't my keys. And then he told me to call 911 because he would love to get into one last shootout. So he is threatening to kill himself, the cops, whatever, if I call 911. So now, I'm aware that there are going to be consequences if I ask for help. He is preventing me from leaving, and I'm trapped. There's nowhere that I can go. So at this point, my only hope in my eyes is, because this is happening on the front lawn, somebody's bound to see this. There are cars driving by. He's screaming at the top of his lungs. He's throwing me, he's pushing me, all this sort of stuff. Somebody is bound to come. So at some point, I'm like, I just need to survive long enough for the cops to come. And I wait and I wait, and until eventually I realize nobody called, the cops aren't coming, nobody's gonna save you. And the helplessness was just unimaginable, unimaginable. Like, how could you drive by and see that and do nothing? And I felt so alone and so trapped. And I was believing that this was a mental health issue. So I'm thinking the only way that we can fix this, the only way that I can get out of this is if he heals. And I start researching treatment for TBIs and for PTSD. And I come across this Joe Rogan podcast where this Dr. Mark Gordon is talking about the hormonal imbalance that occurs, especially in Army veterans or military veterans from repeated concussive, like blast trauma, and how those hormones affect personality, perception, emotional regulation, things like that. And I'm like, this is it. Like, I found it. I just need to get him on this kind of treatment protocol. I reach out to the doctor, and the doctor actually calls me while we're in an argument. And this argument was particularly bad. I was trying to leave. This was the first time he fired a shot inside the house. He was standing in the doorway of our walk-in closet, and I had a bag I was trying to leave, and he fired the shot so close to my hand that the gunpowder burned my hand, and I knew that he wasn't watching where he was shooting, and all I could think was, like, he wouldn't have known if he was if he shot my hand until he did it. And it was like that moment when this doctor is calling me and I can't answer the phone. And I haven't told him that I reached out to this doctor because I just want to know if it's a possible answer before I say anything because I know that's going to be a fight. And he sends me a text message. The doctor sends me a text message asking to have my ex reach out to him. And because of the shot fired in the house, I think maybe he realized that he'd crossed a line a little bit. And he breaks down in fake tears and sobbing, and he's the victim. And most of these arguments end with him lamenting that he can't control it. And he becomes suicidal or threatens suicide. So this was one of those, he'll take off with his pistol. I'll hear a single shot, have to go out and check and see, like, did he just kill himself? And I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to convince him to call this doctor back. And finally, I told him, like, I think I found it. This makes sense. It's not the therapy that you've had before. It's not the medication. This is something different. Here is this doctor with somebody in the same special operations branch as you who experienced similar things. This sounds like it's the answer. And he agrees to listen to the podcast and then never does. And then he has the opportunity through another veteran to go to Costa Rica for ayahuasca treatment. And I have, based on my education prior to training dogs, I knew a lot about psychedelic treatment and mental health, and I was all for it. I knew a ton about it already. I did a bunch more research. He ends up going away to Costa Rica for this ayahuasca treatment. And there's therapists that they talk to before to prep them, and then post treatment therapy as well that they recommend the family members engage in because of how different life can look like after treatment and what works best for post treatment. So he goes away, and after one of his first ayahuasca ceremonies, he tells me, I've been horrible to you and you haven't deserved any of it. And I'm really sorry. And it was like
everything that I wanted to hear. And I do believe that in that moment, while he still had ayahuasca in his system, that was probably the truth. Like maybe some of the only true things that he ever told me, but I believe in the moment that was the truth from him. And I was so relieved because I'm like, we found it. This is it. This is the answer. This is how he's going to heal. And once he is no longer sick, then this will no longer be our life. He comes back, and within less than 24 hours, we're heading out in one of the trucks. He gets upset. He throws his keys so hard that he smashes the windshield in the truck. And we're like 100 feet from the house when this happens. So I'm trying to talk to him like, calm down, let's, instead of looking at what this is ruining for our day, let's look at what is possible instead. Let's look at the potential positive. Maybe we're meant to stay home today so that we can just relax. Maybe that's our day. Let's look forward to the opportunity that we have instead. And he explodes, he blows up and explains to me that I am inhibiting his healing because I'm not allowing him to have the platform to heal after treatment. I'm not giving him the space that he needs. It's going to be difficult with work because of the people that he's working with and how negative they are. And he just doesn't have it in him to just go back into his daily life with this new way of being. So I try and fix it. I reach out to the owner of the kennels again, the guy who originally gave me the job, and I said, "Hey, I've got a big favor for you. Can I stay at the apartment at the kennels, and can I use one of your work vehicles to get back and forth? I want to give him some space. I want to have an income so that he doesn't have to worry about work. I want him to have as few worries as possible and focus on working on himself." And this guy agrees. Like, amazing. So I spend 3 to 4 days away training at the kennels. I bring the dog that I trained back to the kennels. So he's got what I think is everything he needs to continue to heal. While I'm there, he obsessively calls and texts. He will call and just sit on the phone for hours. And, I'm in a kennel environment with 50 dogs. So, like, I can't really talk. I'm working. Thankfully, the owner is understanding and he's happy that I'm there to do the work. And my ex is calling me in the middle of the night. He's keeping me up. So I'm not going to bed early. I'm working 12 hours. And then I head back home after my 3 or 4 days of work. I clean up the house. I go grocery shopping. I meal prep for both of us so that we both have meals for the time that I'm away. Take care of everything. And he's just sort of sitting there on his butt, not doing anything. And when I try to leave to go back to work, he starts interfering, threats of suicide. And I think, okay, well, I'll drive there in the morning. I'll get up at 3:30. I'm already getting up at 4. So no big deal. And I start coming in late to work. And again, my boss is super understanding. And it becomes a bigger and bigger problem. He calls me in the middle of the night and he's ranting, sends me all these text messages about how he's going to torture and kill his family for what they put him through when he was a child. I think he was trying to get me to go back home so that he could control my behavior. And I'm realizing that he feels like he's losing control of me because I'm not home. And this is his way to regain control. Eventually, I have to quit my job. he starts telling me that my time away is doing more harm than good and that he needs me there. So I tell my boss, and there was initially an agreement that I was going to open a second kennel location at the house. And my ex was clearing land for the kennels to go. There was a logo made. They were about to do a social media post. And then suddenly the kennel building turned into a garden shed after I quit my job. So any opportunities that I'm having to have any independence are just being squashed.
So before we get to the beginning of the end of your story, so much has already happened, and that is an understatement. And the trauma bond is really strong here to begin with. And based on your psychology, or what I'll call your identity, you are just open to looking at what's wrong with yourself, and taking responsibility for your actions. And in this case, inspecting things that you didn't even do. But there's kernels of truth in thing. There's lots of kernels of truth. His stories can be kernels of truth. The mental health stuff is the get out of jail free card here. You working on the resilience aspect of things. That's also part of your identity in a way. The strength he pointed out at the beginning. You're strong. You've been through a lot. This is making you stronger. This is in you. A lot of things are tugging you to stay here. And now, with that being said, take us here through the beginning of the end.
New Year's Eve, this was the beginning of the end for me. This was something that I couldn't excuse anymore. I could not believe what he was telling me. We were about to go out to a friend's place for New Year's Eve. He, started an argument over God knows what. And he pinned me to the ground. He was choking me. He was on top of me, choking me. He stood up. He fired another shot in the house, through the floor, and then sort of walked over to the door as I was trying to leave to block the doorway. And because I wouldn't argue with him, I didn't want to fight, or I wasn't going to put my hands on him to push him out of the way. I knew that would instigate. So I tried to squeeze my body in between him and the space of the open doorway. And when I did that, when I turned my body to the side, he headbutted me. And immediately I felt like hot liquid, and I tasted blood, and I knew that I was bleeding from somewhere. I didn't know where. I thought he'd knocked my teeth out. So I was running my tongue across my teeth to feel for, a broken tooth or something. And I look over, and he's on his knees, sort of like his hands in a praying position, going, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And I still have no idea where I'm bleeding from, but there's a lot of blood. So I feel again, and I notice there's a big split in my lip. And I'm trying to stop the bleeding. He gets up, he walks outside. I can't stop this bleeding, and it's a steady stream of blood coming out of my face. And I'm panicked and feeling really helpless. And he comes back to the door, and he has this look of like fake shame. It wasn't real shame. I don't know how to describe it, but it was hard to look at. It was so awkward. And I realized in that moment that once he did damage that he couldn't excuse away, like this was physical damage, he immediately de-escalated. So he did have the ability. He's telling me that he's out of control and explosive and doing all these things because he can't de-escalate on his own. He can't control his emotions, that I'm creating all of this anger. But then in that moment, when he saw that there could be potential consequences to his actions, it was an instant de-escalation from him. And the lies that I was painting for him, the lies that I was believing, it all started to unravel at that moment. So he agreed to take me to the hospital. He said that I did need stitches. And then because I was afraid of what he would do if I told the cops, if I called the cops or anything like that, because of his threats of suicide and also his threats of getting into a shootout with the cops, I didn't want to go that route. So he took me, he agreed to take me to the hospital. And then on the way there, he turns the truck into the ditch and crashes the truck in the ditch. And he just turns to me and said, "You hit your head on the dash. That's what happened." So he goes from like showing this fake remorse and shame, this immediate de-escalation, to him realizing that I'm not going to tell on him and starting to fabricate this story to explain what happened. Like he knows that I'm going to be on his side. Now let's paint this picture. And so now I've become like part of his excuse. Like he's now involved me in the process of creating an excuse for his lies. We get there, and as I'm leaving the truck, he makes some threat like, "You should tell them what really happened because I want to die." Something along those lines. And I assure him that I'm not going to tell him, or I'm not going to tell anybody what really happened. And I go in, I check in the hospital. But as I'm sitting there in the waiting room, he's out in the truck. He didn't want to come in with me. I become really uncomfortable. Like, the longer this is taking, the more upset he's going to be because he's shifted from this shame and remorse. It's only going to escalate. So after a while, I decide that I'm just going to tape my lip shut, and I walk out of the ER and we head back home. And I make a call to his post-treatment counselor to book an appointment for myself because it was recommended the whole time that I speak with somebody who is educated on the psychedelic treatment process. That's who they recommend. He also recommended it. So, like, I'm just feeling really helpless and I need somebody to talk to. And I can't trust anybody close to me. I'm not comfortable with that. So I speak with her. And while I'm talking to her, he's calling me and I'm not answering because I'm speaking with her. And I get off the phone with her finally and I let him know I finally made an appointment. And he decides that he's no longer willing to get treatment now because I took the only good thing that he had away by speaking with her. Like, we couldn't share, and I start to realize he can no longer control the narrative. He doesn't want to continue to speak with this woman because I'm sure he's told her stories that are incompatible with my side of the story. And I'm sure he's worried about the things that I've told her and that he can't keep lying anymore. But also he's threatened me that I've interfered with his treatment again. So it's my fault that he can't get better anymore. But it starts nagging at me. I start allowing my doubts that I've been pushing away to come back and sort of speak to me. And I'm realizing that he has a lot more control than I had initially thought. Life in general is unraveled. He had stopped working, he stopped taking work calls, he had all these excuses. He was reliant on me doing all of these stupid small businesses that he was starting for me that he claimed should make us millionaires. And it was, my inadequacies were the reason why we weren't millionaires. So life in general was falling apart, and financially we were really bad. Behind on house payments. He had gotten a loan for one of the small businesses that he opened and blew all the money on other things. And we're in this position where I've spent all of the settlement money trying to get us back on track while he's just blowing money and not working. I can no longer afford an immigration lawyer for me to legally work in the country. And I don't even know what we're going to do. He starts lying to me about where he's going. I noticed it because I was experiencing so much anxiety about him coming home. He shared his location with me, and I was trying to make everything perfect when he got home so that we didn't have a reason to argue. Dinner was ready, all of that sort of stuff. And I start noticing that he is lying about where he is, and I'm suspecting that I know who he's cheating on me with. And that's when he starts this narrative of why are we even together? Because I think he's found the next person that he wants to move on to. And the violence and the arguments was nonstop at this point. There was no de-escalation from the tension anymore. There was no cycle. We were just staying in that tense mode. And things had escalated from nothing to him slamming fists and throwing things in 30 seconds. He hates me. Every opportunity that he has to belittle me, to harm me in any way possible. He's also making a lot of comments about our relationship. And I've made the decision at this point that I'm not going to wait for him to change his mind when he tells me that he wants me to go. So I book a U-Haul. I reach out to my mother and I tell her that he's asked me to leave and that I have nowhere else to go and I have no money. And I ask her if she can help me to pay for a U-Haul so that I can come back to Canada. And she agrees. I don't really give her too much information. And I packed my stuff up and I left. And I was very ashamed when I came back because I had lied to everybody. I wasn't ready to tell anybody what had happened yet. I couldn't tell them that I had been lying for years and that this person that I claimed to be was a good person and that I asked them to love and support based on the fabrication that I had painted because I felt so much shame and guilt for the emotional investment that I cost other people. I couldn't deal with it yet. So I said that his mental health was negatively impacting me to the point that I could no longer help him, and it wasn't a good environment for both of us. That was the best that I could come up with. So I didn't have to tell people that I lied for years and that I made you believe that you loved somebody that didn't exist. And one day, my friend got sick of hearing that excuse and reached out to his ex. And she recommended that her and I speak. And when I spoke with her, we had very similar stories. And I think that was sort of all I needed to know that it wasn't my fault because he was telling me, like, I've never fought like with anybody like this before. So for me, it was really validating to have somebody who wasn't me share an experience that he claimed he'd never had with anybody before. And I realized that moment that this horrifying person that I couldn't conceive of being real was actually real. Because, this is the stuff of movies. Somebody that horrifying. These people don't exist in real life. It was easier to believe that I was at fault because the alternative is believing that he is an absolute monster who enjoys hurting people, not because he's unable to control himself, but because it's actually something he likes to do. So that was the moment that I realized that, yep, he's actually just a monster. And I broke contact with him at that moment. I stopped answering his calls, and he had a meltdown about that. And then he created a fake Instagram account. He called me to tell me that somebody messaged him and was bad mouthing me, and he was sticking up for me. And he just thought I should know that somebody's out there bad mouthing me. And I said, that's fine. Like, let them care what people say about me. If you know me well enough, you'll know it's not true. And if you don't know me well enough, then I don't care. Well, he didn't like that. So he got very upset that I didn't take the bait. He sent me a screenshot from this fake Facebook or Instagram account that was apparently messaging him. But it was only a screenshot of how he was defending me. And, I just stopped engaging with him after that. And as these people do, he had his little meltdown. He'll call 13 times and I don't answer. He'll text me and that sort of stuff. And I started to experience really bad anxiety. And I think I'd gotten so used to pushing everything down, ignoring my own feelings, ignoring my needs, dismissing the horror of what I had been through. And one thing that I held was a lot of guilt that I never called the cops and reported his abuse. I did call the cops one time, but I never reported any abuse. And when I left, I was blaming myself for being too weak to hold him accountable. And I was feeling like I would be responsible for the death of someone else. That he was going to kill the next person that he was with. He was going to kill somebody, and that wouldn't have happened if I had the strength to call the cops and report him. Then finally I decided I was going to make it an appointment with a therapist. A little bit late, but, better late than never. And upon speaking with the therapist, he, said that I had PTSD. And the state of mind that I was in, I thought that was a cop-out diagnosis because I feel like every doctor jumps to that. You experience trauma and you have side effects. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's PTSD or CPTSD. I thought it was a cop-out. And when I left the appointment, I was telling somebody, and it was in that moment that I realized, oh, you're an idiot, Lita. You are showing all of the clinical signs. This is like the textbook diagnostic criteria for PTSD or CPTSD. That's what you're experiencing. That's why you can't sleep. That's what this anxiety is. And somehow that awareness really helped me understand what was going on and make sense of it instead of just spinning myself up. So, in talking through all of the things that are swimming in my head, I made the decision to file a police report. However late it was after the abuse, there is no statute of limitations for felony assault. And so I tried to file a police report, I think, to alleviate my own guilt for not having done it sooner. And the healing process has been really difficult. It is long, it's ongoing, but it's so worth it. And I had to go through a lot of pain in order to advocate for myself, it took way more than it should have for me to realize how important it was that I take care of myself and my needs. And that's sort of the point that I'm in right now, is that understanding that I'm allowed to feel the things that I'm feeling and that I didn't deserve the things that I went through, that nothing that I did caused him to behave the way that he did.
And if you had any words of wisdom for everyone listening, what would they be?
Their actions do not turn you into a monster. So your actions are never responsible for the way that they behave. It is not your fault when somebody behaves that way. When you go through these difficult times, it is arming you to become a better person, but you need to advocate for yourself. You need to grow from these experiences and find people that you can trust, really trust to be vulnerable with and share what you're experiencing and what you're thinking so that you can get a different perspective for what you're experiencing, because you are likely too close to what's happening to see things for how they really are.
Well, Lita, I really want to thank you for being here with me, with everyone today. We're happy that you're alive. We're happy you got back to your home and that you're doing better and that, you're in this healing process. But you went through a lot of stuff on many different levels, the fear, the threats, the real physical abuse, and the real danger to your life, on top of the verbal things that were going on and the reality that wasn't a reality for you. So, just a really big thank you for discussing all these things. People are going to be validated from a lot of what you went through. So, a big thank you to that. You hit a lot of different things today for people to be validated from, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. And thank you for waking up this early today and doing this with me. And I hope you continue to do well, and maybe in the future we'll have you back on to see how you're doing in a year from now.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you once again, Lita, for being a guest on our show. And if you want to be a guest like Lita was today, go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. Click on the guest form button at the top of the page. There you can read all of our instructions, and please read them all. And either send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@pm.me or fill out our guest form and press the submit button. And we also have a newsletter that has a free workbook from this episode. It is also free at narcissistapocalypse.com. It's a great newsletter. It's helpful to point out certain things in this episode that you may not have seen. The workbook has a lot of reflections in it about this episode and about your life as well. So sign up to our newsletter today. Get that free workbook. We send every week. We get new workbooks being sent to you. So sign up today. And that is it for today's episode, for today's survivor story. So for myself and Lita, we hope you have a good night.